Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our CBT and relapse prevention webinar, second to last one of the series. And so very happy to have you with us. A couple of housekeeping issues. First off, if you're listening live and you're on an iPhone, I noticed that you can actually slide back and forth between my image and the slides. If you're on a PC, you actually should be able to see both the slides and my image. In regards to questions, you'll see a hand that is on the right side of your screen. If you hit that button, it's just like raising your hand, and I will see it hopefully eventually. And I can activate your microphone if it's activated on your computer, and you'll be able to ask the question for all of us to hear. If your microphone is not activated, you can also ask a question by hitting the on the right-hand side. You'll see where it says question, and you can actually type it in, and I'll be checking from time to time. This is a recorded webinar that will eventually be available on the CCAP website. So if you would like your voice not to be on that video, then don't ask it on live here. So what else? So I'm going to have a post-test and survey automatically sent to you when I close out the webinar. So stay on the line. It'll be sent to you automatically. You just fill it out. It's very simple. Three survey questions, 5 post-test questions. And you'll hit submit, and then I will receive that, and it will be from that I will generate your CEU certificate. If you are not watching live and you're watching the recording, I will be sending you the post-test and evaluation later and separately. So I think that is it. I will tell you that this CBT and relapse prevention, we'll be telling a few stories. Hopefully you'll find them fun, but it's to give the practical application of some of the information that I'll be sharing with you. We do have time for questions, so feel free to give us those. And then, okay, so we're about ready to get started. My interest in relapse prevention came from a man by the name of Terence Gorski, who really is kind of a mentor of mine. I read some information that he had put out back when I got sober, and this would have been in late '88. And so this information really helped me in my own sobriety. And I eventually, once I became a counselor, I decided that making a talk out of that information, since it helped me so much, would be valuable for others. And so that's when I first started into this down this relapse prevention road. And then as we went along, it was kind of interesting. When I did the alcohol and drug studies, although we learned about CBT and stuff, until I went to school and got my degree in psychology and took a whole class on it, I didn't realize that this Gorski model relapse prevention, I mean, it is CBT, really in its purest form. So, I've kind of integrated the CBT into this so that you can see this and help you in your practice and at your program with clients, because there is, as you well know, our clients really, their thinkers aren't working too hot sometimes, and they have this negative filter that is put on it, and this globalization, and so we want to be able to point out when our clients are thinking in ways that are going to make them not feel very well, and therefore maybe increase their desire to numb. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I'd like to do is just I found this definition from the APA of cognitive behavioral therapy, and I happen to like this one. Cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on the relationship among thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and notes how changes in any one domain can improve functioning in the other domains. So, for example, altering a person's unhealthy thinking can lead to healthier behavior, and improved emotional regulation. So, I actually had a recent experience where I caught myself, using the CBT. I was speaking at a conference. It was a DUI task force conference in Oregon, and it was a big conference, and so they had breakout sessions that had approximately 100 people. So the first talk that I did it was pretty full. I mean, there was like 100 people there. Energy level was through the roof, and I love that because I get to feed off the audience's energy, unlike I'm able to do right now, looking into a camera. And so it went really well. I got some really good positive feedback. Well, then the next day was my second talk, and the second talk was the last session of the day. After lunch, last session, and the place was about 3/4 full. And I'm looking at it, and then where my head went was, man, I must have really not done very well yesterday, because like nobody wanted to come back and hear it. And I started that shame kind of got activated. And so I actually went over to the other sessions to see if their rooms looked the same. Well, they did. And so, I was really starting to think about this. And it's like, okay, this is the last session of the day. Every indication was that the webinar or the talk went well. I got some really good positive feedback. You kind of know when it's going well or not. And so I just decided that, what, this isn't about me. This isn't about the talk that I did yesterday. This is just simply that it's the last session of the conference. And so in changing my thinking, it actually changed the way I felt, because thinking about it like I failed or I didn't measure up, and then I would go I would go into this talk not having confidence, being self-conscious. And when that happens for me, I'm just a horrible speaker. And so those thoughts would lead to those shameful feelings and not measuring up, and therefore affecting my behavior, which wouldn't be top-notch or as good as I could do. So in changing the way that I thought about it, it's like, no, this isn't about me. This is the last session of the day. I did well yesterday. I will do well today again. And I was able to go in not feeling that shame and having confidence, and then performing well. So that's just an example of how changing my thoughts was able to change my emotions and my behavior. So and then it goes on to say, and this is from Psych Central. Our unique patterns of thinking, feeling, behaving are significant factors in our experiences, both good and bad. Since these patterns have such a significant impact on our experiences, it follows that altering these patterns can change our experiences. So as our clients are going through life, the way they think about stuff really has a strong impact in how their life is going to be. Is their life going to be stressful, and fearful and anxious, or is it going to be calm and confident and happy and joyful? And the way people think about things have a direct effect on that. So if we're able to help our clients change the way they think, their experience of life will be better. And we all know that when people are feeling better emotionally, they're going to have less of a chance and less of a tendency to relapse and to enter the craving cycle, which we'll be talking about shortly. So here's the outline of the talk. Those of you who have seen my craving and relapse video, which was actually a video designed for programs to show their clients, will have heard some of this information already, but it'll be a good review for you, I hope. So this is the outline. So we're going to talk about the craving cycle itself, obsession, compulsion, physical craving, and drug-seeking behavior. And then we'll talk about the set of behaviors and the trigger events. So let's go ahead and start off with the craving cycle. So being a cycle, so it typically starts with obsession, gets so strong, moves into compulsion, gets so strong, eventually moves into physical craving and drug-seeking behavior. So obsession. So obsession is a thought. It's a thinking state. So boom, a thought hits about using. And the thoughts are usually, if you're thinking about using, they're positive thoughts about using, right? That, if I use, it's going to feel real good. and or I can escape this pain. And if left interrupted, it gets so strong where seemingly they can't think about anything else. It's like the racehorse with the blinders on. It's like the singleness of purpose, can't think about anything else. And and it's a thinking state, and it's recurrent and persistent. So eventually, again, if left uninterrupted, it gets so strong, it moves to a compulsion. And so when it moves to a compulsion, it's moving from a thinking state to a feeling state, right? So you're going from a thinking, obsession, strong thoughts to an emotion, and which looks a little more like this. Whoo, man, I really want to use. And the person is emotionally involved in that. And what happens is they start thinking with their emotion. It's like they might even know that like this isn't a good idea for me, but their emotions are saying, but you can do it this time, just this once, you'll be able to do it, you'll get away with it. And the urge becomes super strong, and eventually sometimes their thinking follows that strong compulsion to use. Now, again, when it moves from an obsession to a compulsion, it's moving from a thinking state to an emotional state. And step 2 of Alcoholics Anonymous reads, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, there's an implication there that the behavior that alcoholics and addicts engage in is really insane behavior. And let's face it, when somebody is using and they have all of these consequences, and then they end up using again, the people around them are going, wait, dude, what is wrong with you? Like every time you drink or use, you turn into somebody we don't even like recognize. You become kind of a maniac. You're not your normal self. You're not happy. You can't be trusted. You are totally irresponsible. You're dishonest. And like, then you like are remorseful and stuff, and you think you'd never use again, and here you are using again. And so people that can't really understand that. But I think really this obsession moving to compulsion, this thinking state of moving to the thinking state, moving to the emotional state, compulsion, helps to explain this insanity. Because when somebody is thinking with their emotion, it doesn't make sense sometimes. You ever made a decision based on emotion that didn't work out real well? Yeah, me too. So when I'm thinking with my emotion, it causes me to make decisions that really don't look right. They don't look very sane at all. And so therefore you could say it really looks insane. Then a compulsion will eventually get so strong again, if left uninterrupted, will move to physical craving. And physical craving is when your body's actually asking for the drug. So we all know that, when we talk about like an acute detox, the person has put alcohol or drugs in their system, and it's really poison to the body. So the body can't survive with this poison in it. So it actually has to change its physical makeup to survive with the poison in it. So the more poison I put in, the more my body has to change to survive with the poison in it. And then what happens is eventually the person stops using for whatever reason, and now their body goes into shock because it can't survive in this transformed state without the poison, without the drugs and alcohol. So it then has to move over back to its normal state. But the problem is moving back to the normal state is it hurts, it's uncomfortable. So the body is saying, give me some more of those drugs and alcohol so I can stay over here where it's nice and comfortable, so I don't have to go through this painful process of getting back to normal. And that's the acute detox, right? That's the shake and bake kind of detox, if you will. And then there is a post-acute detox, which Terence Gorski coined the term post-acute withdrawal syndrome, PAWS for short, PAWS. And PAWS is the detox that happens after the acute detox, after the shake and bake. So if somebody's drinking, a fifth of vodka every day for years, they'll go into detox, and they might give them 2 or 3 days until their vitals stabilize, and eventually they'll discharge them. Well, do you think the body, after drinking years of a fifth of vodka, after just like 2 or 3 days, is going to get the rest of the way back to normal? Well, of course not. So the post-acute withdrawal is the body getting the rest of the way back to normal. And this can happen, Gorski says, over a period of 18 months. and where the body gets completely back to normal. It typically doesn't take that long, of course, but the symptoms are a little more mild and obscure. There's memory issues, inability to concentrate, insomnia, inability to sleep, anhedonia, the inability to experience excitement, pleasure. And so it's really important, of course, to let our clients know about this, because if they think like, okay, now that I'm sober and like I can't remember anything, I can't concentrate and perform on my job like I did maybe, or nothing seems fun anymore, they might say, well, this isn't all what sobriety is cracked up to be. I'm like out of here. At least when I was using, I had a little bit of fun. So we need to let them know that this is a temporary state that will go away once, if they stay sober for a while. So we just, tell them, hang on to their butts and stick around, and eventually those symptoms will subside. So then eventually the physical craving tends to turn into drug-seeking behavior. And this is really what the alcoholic or addict does to seek out the use. And although it's pretty obvious that it's going on, Gorski says that sometimes the addict or alcoholic doesn't even realize that they're doing it. They might have a real good reason to, drive down or ride down a certain street, but that's where their dope dealer hung out. They might have justified in their head that it would be a good idea to go down to the bar and grill or the watering hole they used to go to. I just want to see the old gang. I've been sober for a little while, but that's where they can get alcohol, and they're really seeking alcohol without maybe knowing it. They might have a real good reason to go down to their local drugstore, but that's where their Vicodin prescription's waiting for them. So it's often ritualized and habitual. The person doesn't even know it. So that's the craving cycle. And so two things that we know about the craving cycle is that it happens to all alcoholics and addicts, right? I mean, the person, isn't, I mean, I've been to AA meetings where a person says, I went to my first AA meeting and I never had another desire to drink. Well, that was like way different from my experience and way different from the experience of most. So this really happens to just about every alcoholic. They eventually get to this craving cycle, and it always precedes relapse. We always stop at the craving cycle before the relapse happens, right? The person's not, just walking down the walking down the street, they trip over the curb, they land on their back and a crack pipe falls out of the sky into their mouth. No, they start thinking about it. They get emotional about it, their body starts asking for it, and they eventually seek it out. So with these two things, that it happens to all alcoholics and addicts, and it always precedes relapse, this should tell us that this is a dangerous place, that we wouldn't want our clients to get to this place if we can. We know it's going to happen, but we may be able to help them minimize how often they get there, right? So if it happens to all alcoholics and addicts, and it always precedes relapse, we want to help them not get to the craving cycle so often. And how do we do that? We do that by helping them learn about what their setup behaviors are and what their trigger events are. Now, I think we in our profession do a really good job at teaching our clients what to do when they get to the craving cycle. All these tools of recovery that we give them, calling another alcoholic or addict and letting them know they have a craving or an uncomfortable emotion, getting to a meeting, reading, program literature, journaling, exercise, all of the, thinking it through to its logical ending. All of these tools that we give them, we're really good at teaching these tools. But what I don't think as a whole we do generally in our profession is teach them about the precursors to the craving cycle, these setup behaviors and the trigger events. So my hope is that as a result of this talk, it will either remind you or provide information that's like, and that you'll find, oh yes, of course, we need to have them learn this information so that they can avoid getting to the craving cycle so often. So one thing that I really found interesting is the parallel between CBT and the craving cycle. So if you look here, you've got the event, and the event is let me get my So the event in CBT, you have the event, and in the craving cycle of addiction, it's the the set of behavior or the trigger event. Then as a result of the event, there's a mental interpretation of that. There's a thought about it, right? And so in the craving cycle, the obsession is the thought, right? It's the thinking state. Then the thought results in an emotion, a feeling about it. Well, obsession eventually moves into a compulsion where the person's now in emotion. They're emotionally involved in this, and then eventually, we know that emotions can lead to physical symptoms. And here we have the physical craving, and then we have the resulting behavior, and then resulting in drug-seeking behavior. So I just found this very, very interesting that we end up. I found it very interesting, the parallels between these two, the cognitive behavioral therapy and the craving cycle. So let's get back to, all right. So there's the outline again. So remember, we are going to be helping people learn about their set of behaviors and their trigger events so they can avoid getting to the craving cycle so often. So let's start with the set of behaviors. So first off is poor diet. So increasingly more of us in our profession are focusing on the importance of diet in recovery. Those of you who are working in rehab know that our clients sometimes come to us pretty sucked up. There's not a lot of alcoholics and addicts, or cocaine addicts or heroin addicts or pill addicts that are really focused on taking care of their body. They're more focused on their next hit, drink, or pill. And it's really interesting. Those of you who know Kevin McCauley, he has this really great video called Pleasure Unwoven, and he talks about, he makes the best case I've ever heard for the disease model of addiction, and he talks about it living in the midbrain, and in the midbrain, that's where our survival exists. So our instinct of fight or flight, or making sure that we feed ourselves, or procreation, right? And so that's why a lot of times the addiction, it will actually go to the top of that list, that the use seems so important for the person's survival that these things like poor diet and exercise become secondary, and so the person is not eating and taking care of themselves like they should. So I'm a real proponent of teaching about what a proper diet looks like. Many of our folks don't even know what it looks like. In a program that I ran, we used to have them do like a 36-hour diary, like on Thursday night, where they would track, document everything that they eat, and then on Saturday morning group, we would actually compare what they have written down to an adequate diet and help them, make changes that will hopefully improve it. And so, when the person's not eating right, they have a tendency to not feel physically well. And if they're not feeling physically well, they tend to not feel very well emotionally. If they don't feel very well emotionally, they end up more stressed. And the more stressed you are, the more often you escape to the craving cycle. It's funny, the Kevin McCauley video that I pointed out earlier, I've heard him talking for years. We actually had him come to one of my programs and do a talk before the video and before anyone really knew about him. And he would talk about all this, and he would boil it down to where it lives, and then what is it that actually activates it. And he says, you're not going to like this, stress. He says stress gets the whole thing going, right? So the person not eating right, they physically don't feel well, psychologically don't feel well, increased stress, and then it activates the craving cycle. So if they learn how to eat right, physically they start feeling better, which follows that psychologically they'll feel better, which leads to less stress and less often ending up in that craving cycle. And then the other thing about that is there's kind of a direct psychological effect as well. If the person's eating right, they're taking care of themselves, they're taking care of their body. I'm finally treating my body right, and there's a kind of a self-esteem building part to this, that they're starting to live right. They're starting to live in a way that's healthy for them. And then the next one is lack of exercise. And Terry Gorski, The way that he introduces this is the brain's natural opiate-like substances that are released when we do cardiovascular exercise. You've heard of the runner's high? Well, that's a real thing. It's your body releasing the endorphins that are the body's natural painkillers. And so the thinking here is if the person is doing cardiovascular exercise on a regular basis, the body has its natural feel-goods running through, which gives them a general sense of well-being. Now, somebody might say, well, aren't I just, pumping my body full of, opiates? I'm not putting in my arm anymore. I'm just creating it naturally, and won't I get addicted to that as well? Okay, yeah, that can happen. But the way that I kind of also like to introduce this as exercise being another tool in the toolbox of recovery. I've used this myself. When I was about, 60 days sober, I had a very serious craving, and I had 3 favorite tools that I used when I got a craving. I would think it through to its logical ending, right? So if I use this would happen, and then 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 I get over here to where, like what the big book calls pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And I remember that because that's where it always ends up, and it really helps to take that craving away. I also would say a prayer to my higher power, and I would call my sponsor. So on this occasion, I did those 3 things, but I still had a little bit of a craving. And so I don't know what compelled me. Maybe it was reading this Gorski article shortly before that. I ran out of the house. I ran around the block at a pretty fast pace. And I got back and my heart was pumping, my blood's flowing, I'm breathing. And do you know that craving was all the way gone? Now, this was a huge discovery for me because I had never gone from like a full-blown craving to like no craving at all. And it was, working those tools that I said and running really helped me. Now notice I didn't just get the craving and then go out and exercise. If I did that, whenever I got a craving, I just exercised, got a craving, exercise. That way, I might get addicted to it. But no, I thought it through. I called my sponsor. I said a prayer. And I exercise. So doing it that way, the likelihood is the person's not going to get addicted to that. So it's very similar to the diet as far as the effects of lack of exercise. Somebody's not exercising, feel kind of sluggish. They know they're not they're turning their body down, leads to not feeling well psychologically and more stress, and you end up in the craving cycle. But when the person starts exercising on a regular basis, they physically are going to start feeling better, and therefore emotionally feeling better, less stress, less often ending up in the craving cycle. And you have the same direct psychological effect. I'm working out, I'm taking care of myself, I'm feeling good, I'm finally doing good for my body, and it has that same self-esteem building effect. So let me have a look here to see if we have any questions, and I don't. Let me get to where is it? Attendee. Okay, so let me see here. All right, so it doesn't appear that I have any questions. Okay, so let's move on to poor stress management. So in the stress management, Alcoholics and addicts, 2 things that I know about them. One is that they don't do feelings well. Their first instinct when they get an uncomfortable emotion is run, I'm out of here. And also they have a tendency to be more sensitive than most. The alcoholics and addicts seem to be more sensitive and have more emotions. So that's a pretty lethal combination. They have more feelings than most and they don't do them well. It's no wonder they end up drinking and using. So it's really important for a person to learn how to manage stress as it comes, because they tend to be just more stressed. than most, and things tend to bother them more than most. So what we want to do is teach them how to manage stress during their regular day. You know, we teach them these tools, but we really need to help them with the practical application of doing it once they get out of our treatment programs. Because what happens is they'll be going along their day, and so maybe something might stress them out and their stress level goes to here, but if they don't do anything about it or they don't address it, they'll be going, their stress stays there, and then they go through their day, and then the next thing that happens, their stress level gets a little bit higher, and then the next thing happens, their stress goes even higher, and left uninterrupted, then this person might say or do something that normally wouldn't bother them, and boom, they blow up at them. The person's like, whoa, what's going on there? And blowing for the alcoholic and addict is often relapse. So we want to teach them tools of recovery they can use like right now. The most important of which I think is, when you get stressed, any uncomfortable feeling or craving is calling another member of the support system. I really don't think there's any better tool of recovery. I've been saying this louder and louder over the years, and there's just no replacement, I don't think, for getting on the phone with somebody who can truly understand. And it really does need to be another alcoholic or addict to truly understand what the person's going through. Because a person who's not an alcoholic, they don't realize how sensitive and how intolerant of emotion we are. They're like, pull your bootstraps up and get your act together. What's wrong with you? Rather than, if we're calling alcoholic or addicts, like, yeah, I get it. This is hard sometimes. And yeah, I totally get, that we want to use. And then, you have this discussion of, why it's, not a good idea. And, the person can help, the person off the cliff, if you will. So another tool is, maybe, some people will carry a little big book around with them and just start reading it. Others maybe have a spiritual program where they can just say a prayer or meditate, if you're not like, at work or whatever, and you can, go exercise. You can do some like breathing exercises, which, one that I really like is a breathing exercise. And I actually, I did a talk a few months ago, and like, the coffee showed up late, and the AV equipment wasn't working. And so we got everything straight, like with about a minute and a half before I was scheduled to go on. So I just like went outside and, started doing, a breathing exercise, which kind of looks like this, where I'm breathing and counting, going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm breathing at a pace where I'm getting enough air, but not too much air, so I'm not hyperventilating. And what happens is I'm thinking about my counting, and I'm thinking about my breathing. So whatever was stressing me out is kind of pushed aside for a minute. So it just kind of buys me a little bit of time to just kind of, get refocused. So these are just some examples, and you'll have your own examples of stress management techniques that we'll give our clients. There's progressive muscle relaxation, where we tense and relax different muscle groups. And so if they're managing their stress as they go about their day, again, the less often they're going to end up in that craving cycle. All right. So then let's, as we move into the psychological setups, I just thought it would be good to stop over, include this 10 forms of twisted thinking. Some of you may have seen this before. I mentioned earlier that our clients' thinking is a little messed up. You might even say that it's twisted. I know I engaged in a lot of these and still do sometimes. So, and again, the reason this is important is it's these ways of thinking that turn into uncomfortable emotions that lead to behavior, and often using behavior. So we want to be aware of these different ways of thinking, and this would actually be a great education lecture to do these 10 forms of twisted thinking. And then later in the talk, there's some antidotes to these, which we'll just review briefly. Your handout, which is available, you might see it on your screen on the right-hand side. You can just hit that and print that out. Email me if you have any trouble with that. So The first is this all or nothing, black and white thinking. That and this overgeneralization. See, it's like either this or it's this, as if there's nothing in between. It's my interpretation is like either way over here, it really is, that bad, or it's not bad at all. It can't be just like maybe a little bit bad. I had the pleasure of hearing a guy by the name of Albert Ellis do a talk. You might recognize that name. He's the founder of Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. Funny guy. He must have been 90 years old when I went to go hear him talk. And, every other word was an S-bomb or an F-bomb. I thought it was kind of funny, but others in the audience, I think, didn't think it was so cute. But anyway, his part of what he was teaching us was that, we have this tendency to awfulize things. This is awful. This is terrible. Can't live without it. We'll talk about awfulizing sobriety later. And we blow things out of proportion. So it's like, this is awful. This is terrible. I can't live without it kind of thing, rather than just having an attitude of like, oh, that's highly inconvenient. And he says that we have a choice of how we want to look at things. And so this all or nothing thinking, it's like, oh, this is like some big crazy deal, rather than, oh, okay, well, yeah, this is not that great, but no, it's not that bad either. And one thing that I have realized about this black or white thinking, alcoholics and addicts don't do gray very well, right? If I know it's here, I can live with that. If I know it's here, I can live with that. But the tension of living in the gray is so uncomfortable. I have a tendency to just make it black or white, right? So this overgeneralization, this mental filter, where this mental filter, almost these glasses, these negative lens that I sometimes have a tendency to look through, or our clients have a tendency to look through, where we completely discount the positive. We're just locked onto the negatives of it. There's a tendency to jump to conclusions. My experience of this is like with emails. There was a friend of mine who was a colleague, and we were, the leadership of an organization, and sometimes we would disagree on something, and we would really be going back and forth, and sometimes it got kind of heated. And it was really just like we were misinterpreting each other. It was like we had this mental filter. We're looking at these emails going, what? And then we would email back, are you kidding? And so I would get all worked up, and then later on I would show my wife just am I crazy? Look at this. I mean, I just need to do a check on this. And she would look at it and she's like, what? It's like, well, he said that, no, why do you think he meant that? And so she would really help me to be able to see it for what it was. We actually made this rule that we couldn't email each other after 10 o'clock at night. So there's this tendency to jump to conclusions. There's magnification, blowing things out of proportion, emotional reasoning, like we mentioned earlier, when it typically happens, when we get to that compulsion as well. Sometimes our trauma gets activated by somebody or our environment, and we jump straight to an emotional reaction, and which tends to be overblown. I really like the saying that if it's hysterical, it's historical. I really think that's great, because when I blow things out of proportion, it's usually because of something from my past. And then there's should statements, like this real kind of shaming way of thinking. My sponsor once told me, quit shoulding all over yourself. And then there's labeling, where we label it. It's like, this is what it is, or personalization and blame. And this is kind of a form of black or white thinking too. It's like either your fault or it's my fault, as if there's nothing in between. So it's really good to educate our clients on this and to give them some of the antidote, which we'll get into a little bit later. All right, so let's go into the psychological setups. And so the first one is euphoric recall. And in euphoric recall, the person is thinking about the positives of use and blocking out and minimizing the negatives, believing it wasn't that bad. Now, this makes sense. when a person goes into the craving cycle, they're not thinking about how bad it's going to be. They're thinking about how good it's going to be, right? So if we want to teach our clients like thought stopping techniques, like when they catch themselves focusing on the negative or the positives of using, to really just to go, oh, I'm thinking about the positives, let me think about the negatives. And sometimes it's just that simple if they can catch themselves. And that's where that mindfulness, teaching our clients mindfulness, where they can like be aware of what's happening with them, rather than just like getting on this automatic thought, oh, using sounds good, I think I'm going to pursue this. It's like, oh, using sounds good. Wait, my head has gone to a place of using sounds good, but wait, this isn't usually a good idea for me. And why not? And they start maybe thinking about, pushing back with the negatives of using. Sometimes if the person just lets it go and they're thinking about the positives, and they just allow that to keep going. Maybe they're starting to enter into the craving cycle. Sometimes just moving straight from the positives to the negatives is difficult. And so that's where that thinking it through tool works so well. So if I use, then this will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen, and then this will happen. I don't want to go there, and it helps to take the positive thought away. All right, so that's the euphoric recall, and then there's authorizing sobriety, and this is kind of like euphoric recall in reverse, where the person is thinking about the negative aspects of early recovery and blocking out the positives of early recovery. And again, this is really important to let our clients know that this is happening, because if they're thinking if they're awfulizing sobriety, it kind of looks like this. Oh, this is awful. This is terrible. I'm not having any fun. Those counselors are a bunch of quacks, and those AA people are they're brainwashed, and I'm not feeling any better. None of my relationships are patching up. I feel like crap, and my life is going nowhere. I can't get excited about anything. If this is what sobriety is about, I don't want any part of it. Okay. So it's really important for us to have them recognize that this is what they're doing, and to help them get focused on the positives. And even if the person just got to treatment, there's usually some positives that we can just give them. Maybe I don't know. They had kind of an aha moment in group where they learn something about themselves that they can remind themselves of. We can, maybe give them positive strokes about, wow, you've shown up to like every group, and and this is not like your usual behavior, and you're really starting to change, or you're starting to open up. Or maybe there was a family group where they had an interaction with a family member that went well, and so maybe gave him a little bit of hope about the relationship. Maybe a AA panel came in and somebody told their story, or they spoke with an alumni, and the alumni, went through that program, and they've been sober for a while. So maybe if, they're thinking, if I do the same things they did, going through this program, maybe I'll get better. Maybe it's just the fact that they don't have to experience a hangover tomorrow. One thing is also that, the fact that they're in treatment to begin with, that's a really big deal. And I think we need to pay attention to that and call that out. It's a really big deal when we have somebody sitting in that treatment chair. There's an old NIDA stat that said that 1 in 10 alcoholics who need help get it. Only 1 in 10. In my years with KDAC, I was able to go to Washington, D.C. to the legislative day for about 5 years in a row. It was kind of cool. And we went to a talk by Patrick Kennedy, and he came up with a stat that said that 2 in 10 in this country who seek help get it. Are you kidding me? 2 in 10 who seek help? Like they finally decide that they need treatment and they seek out help, and only 2 in 10 get it? That's really bad. My hope is that now with the Medi-Cal waiver, and I know in LA County where I'm at, is if you're below a certain income, all you have to do is get on Medi-Cal, and you can get really any level of care, which is just huge. I'm just so happy about this, and this really may change those stats. But nonetheless, it's a really big deal that they got into that treatment chair, and good job making that decision. I know that was hard, and it's a big deal. And they might say, well, I didn't make this decision. The judge said if I don't do this, I'm going to jail. So, I had to. Or my spouse said if I don't do this or we're going to break up. Or my boss said, I'm going to lose my job. Or my doctor said, my liver's going to explode and I'll die. So, that's all well and good, but I didn't make this decision. They made me do it. And I make it then an empowering statement that says, you may have been choosing between sucks and really sucks, but you really did make this decision. Because some people make a different decision, don't they? Some people say, you know what, no relationship is worth this. I'm done. Or, you know what, I'll just find another job. Forget it. Keep all that stuff. I'm just going to go do my time. I've done it before, and I'll be fine. Some people actually make a different decision, say, you know what, they give up and they say, forget it. I'm just going to drink and die. The people that are sitting in front of you didn't make those decisions. They made a decision to be in that chair, and that is a huge deal. So anyway, awfulizing sobriety. So thinking about the negatives of early recovery, we want to get them locked on into the positives of early recovery. And so and then there's positive expectancy. And this is the belief that drugs and alcohol are still a positive option. It can work for me again. It can fix my situation. And this is just the most crazy thing about addiction, how despite the hundreds of times that I've proven that I can't get away with using without having some sort of consequences. And literally every time I did, I thought I could. It's the craziest thing. Hundreds of times I proved I couldn't do it. Yet once again, I'm sitting there going, you know what? I'm just going to have one hit. I never could do that, but I always thought I could. It was just crazy. And so it's this positive expectancy just blows away any of this previous experience. And so, there was an example, I'll give you. You may have heard me say this before, that, early in my career, there was a gentleman who was in our program, and he was just there for detox, and he really had no intention of staying for the rehab portion of the program. And we all know that just, going to detox and not doing the rehab is really kind of a waste of time and money, because detox is to get it out of your system and rehab is to keep it out of your system. And we tried to explain this to him and he just couldn't get it. He was just like, look, you guys, my doctor told me if I drink again, I'm going to die. Why would I do that? And we tried to educate him on like, well, this disease, yeah, it sometimes doesn't make sense, but our experience is that just getting it out of our system, and no matter how bad the consequences are, we return to it. But he was like, no, I'll be fine. So he discharged after his, few days of detox. And then like a few weeks later, we found out he drank and died. It was so sad, you guys. I mean, this guy was, kind of like the company mascot. He just, he was very funny, fun-loving guy, just loved life. And we in those few short days, we really got kind of fond of him. And man, he ended up drinking and dying. And I'll bet you he didn't just say, you know what, forget it, I'm going to drink and die. I don't get that about this man. I think what happened probably was, you know what, I've been sober for a few weeks. I can drink just one. And then we know what happens to the alcoholic after they have that first drink. They proceed to drink and get back to where they were. And in this case, this gentleman lost his life because of it. So the belief that it would kill him, the belief that alcohol would kill him, didn't destroy this powerful belief that it would work for him again. Very tragic. And then there's the denial and evasion that we're actually doing any of this. No, I'm seeing my past use accurately. It really was that good. Or I'm not, I'm not in denial or anything. And this sobriety is just terrible. I just can't even have fun anymore. No, I really think it can work for me again. And that's why it's really important to create an environment in our groups that is safe to be talking about that negative voice, that addict voice, that still lives in them, but sometimes they're afraid to talk about. And sometimes I think that ambivalence is not met positively by us or by the group. what seems to get met most positively is when things are doing good and they're doing what they need to do for sobriety, rather than that voice that says, man, I still really want to use. We need to make it safe enough and to make that feel and sound normal for the alcoholic or addict, because we want them to share about when they're thinking about the negatives of early recovery. We want them to be sharing that euphoric recall, that stinking thinking, that glamorizing it. Because if it's not safe to do that, they're going to keep it to themselves. And when they do that, we can point out, that they may be, it may be a psychological trick, that there may be a different way of thinking about that. And you guys, that really is the essence of CBT, is helping them to realize how their thinking, leads them to uncomfortable feelings, which eventually leads to the use. And so if we can change their thinking, that is a huge key in relapse prevention. And when relapse starts, it doesn't start by picking up. It starts by these thoughts of using sounds like a good idea, or sobriety is really lousy. Forget about all of this. I really think this can work for me again, right? So we want to spend a lot of time on, having them be able to recognize this. And again, I can't say enough how important mindfulness is. I have a private practice here in Long Beach. And, the people that really do well quickly are ones that are somehow able to develop this mindfulness, this consciousness of their presence of, wow, I'm thinking about the negatives right now, rather than, oh man, this use really sounds good. I think I'm going to do this. How can I get away with, doing this? Rather than, and it's kind of an automatic thought that just keeps running. Rather than when it happens, that positive thought of using happens, and then they can catch it and go, I'm having another one of those thoughts of drinking and using. Wow, is this a good idea for me? Probably not. Why not? And here's all the reasons, right? So mindfulness is really important as we're using these CBT techniques, so that they can recognize, boom, I'm having these thoughts, and have them thought stop and actually change the thoughts, which then change the emotions and or behavior. Okay. All right. So I think I used the term anhedonia earlier, and so let's talk a little bit about this. Excuse me. So anhedonia is really the inability to experience pleasure or excitement. And again, for the alcoholic and addict, if they're not having any fun anymore, their disease is going to be like, really? Is this what you want? You're not having any fun anymore. You're having to feel all these uncomfortable feelings. You can't numb out at all, and you can't have fun anymore. Man, this isn't really worth it. I mean, at least when you were out there using, you had a little bit of fun, had a little bit of pleasure. So you might as well be doing that, because what's life without that? So we want to, teach them that this is something that does have a tendency to happen, that excitement and pleasure is, maybe hard to come by in early sobriety, and let them know that it is temporary. Just like the post-acute withdrawal syndrome, this anhedonia is temporary as well. I have my way that I like to teach clients about it. You may have your own, but I'll give you this one in case you haven't seen it, in case that's one that you would like to use. Before I get into that, it looks like I have a question, so I'm going to have a look here. So why is it that all or nothing thinking is so prevalent for people suffering from addictions? Why jump to conclusions? Is it because very emotional, is it because very emotional and don't handle emotions well, as you stated? Well, my take there, John, is really, I just think it's really hard for addicts and alcoholics to live in that gray area. There's a tension involved in that. This all or nothing thinking, it's like, if it's here, I know it and I can deal with that. If it's here, I know it and I can deal with that. It's that gray area, that tension that we just don't do well. So it's like I either need to know it's here or here, because if it's here, it could go there or it could go here. I can't handle the anxiety sometimes of not knowing what this really is, and so I just got to put it somewhere, and then I can deal with it. So I don't. That's really the best answer I think that I can come up with, John. And thanks for asking the question. I'm sorry it took me a minute to get to that. All right, I think that was the only one. Okay, so let's get to this anhedonia. So there's a graph here, and if you look here on the graph, you've got pleasure. So if you go up, going up on the y-axis here is the level of pleasure, and going along the x-axis is time sober. So the further along in sobriety it goes this way, and the more pleasure you have goes this way. So when the alcoholic or addict is using, the pleasure level really is through the roof. So let me get rid of this pointer. Okay. All right. So the pleasure level is like really high. So you no time in sobriety, and the pleasure level is right at the top. So let's say the person stops using, boom, pleasure level goes to the floor. There's really no significant time in recovery. So if you compare that that pleasure level with that pleasure level, it's a very stark contrast. It's very easily seen. And then, so let's say the person stays sober for a week or two. Now you've got a little time in sobriety, and even if the pleasure level doesn't increase at all, you can see this still is a pretty stark contrast, but it's not the stark contrast of this. So you can see where this is going. The person stays sober longer or even longer. And even if the pleasure level doesn't increase, you compare that pleasure level with that pleasure level, yes, you can easily see the difference, but it's not the stark contrast of this. And the reason is because the person is removed in time from the memory of that, so this doesn't seem quite so bad. Now, the curve, it's usually, there's not just this flat line. Usually they might start getting a little bit of pleasure. So maybe the curve looks a little more like this. So let's say they got, maybe a month of sobriety or something, their pleasure level or starts to increase a little bit. Now you can still see the difference between that and that, but if you took this and brought it, this pleasure level, and brought it over to here, boy, a very stark contrast, right? But out here, this is actually, it's starting to at least approach that top level. And so this person stays longer, gets more excitement. And let's just say that it ends up there, that's the highest that maybe their excitement gets. And even if their excitement level never reaches here, because they're removed in time from the memory of that pleasure level, this pleasure level out here seems about as good as it can get. So if you had to take this and put it over here, you'd be like comparing that and that. It's like blah, blah, I want that. But out here, it seems like that, it feels like that because the person's removed in time from the memory of that. So let me give you some, kind of some, my personal experience with this. So, I've been sober for quite a long time, and in my recovery, I have had the pleasure of seeing 4 beautiful children being born into this world. Just an amazing experience. And it felt like the best thing that could happen. Now, I don't know where it was on this pleasure scale, but if I'm to be quite honest with you, it wasn't there. But because I was removed in time from that, this out here seemed as good as it could get. It wasn't a crack hit to here, but since it was removed in time, this felt like the best possible experience I can have. I wasn't even thinking about that. Here it might be, oh, that was cool, let me go get loaded. Here it's like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Okay. Another example that I can give you is that I was about 11 months sober. It's Thanksgiving, and we were at Grandma's house, and we were getting ready to sit down and have Thanksgiving dinner. And my dad, me and my brothers were sitting down getting ready to play dominoes. And I had this thought. I was like, wow, in previous generations, it was like our parents and grandpa playing dominoes. It was the moms and aunts and grandma over in the, the living room talking away. It was the grandchildren, playing around, on the floor or whatever. And then grandma's over playing the piano, bouncing one of her grandkids on her knee. And so now it's like, it occurred to me, it's like, whoa, what a trip. This is like a generation later. Now it's me and my brothers playing dominoes. Now it's the great-grandchildren on the floor, my brother's kids on the floor playing around. Now it's our wives over there talking away, and great-grandma, God bless her, still playing the piano, bouncing a great-grandkid on her knee. Isn't this great? And I'll tell you, for years when I told this story, I would tear up because it was really the first time in my recovery that just a normal human event gave me great pleasure. And it wasn't like, I don't know where it was on this scale. I don't know where it was, but it was out here. And since it was out here, it wasn't being compared to that. So it seemed like a really great event. Because you know what? Thanksgiving to me, you guys, what it had become is let's get this meal out of the way so I can use for the next 3 days uninterrupted. But now I'm removed in time from that. So out here, wherever it was, just this normal human event gave me great pleasure. So I know I ran that into the ground, but I just think this is so important. I do want to let you know as well, gosh, this is interesting. I keep bringing up Kevin McCauley, but his work is just so great. I really love it. He used to explain it in a different way, and I'll try to demonstrate it for you. He talks about a pleasure threshold, right? So let's just say, this is your graph, and so the normal pleasure threshold goes, from the top to the bottom, right? It looks like that. So, and then what happens is when the person is using, the threshold actually goes like here. So it goes above normal, right? And then goes back down. And the alcoholic and addict, typically, they don't let it go all the way down to the normal threshold. They usually catch it here and then bring it back up. So it ends up going kind of like this, right? And when that happens for a while, then the old threshold moves up, okay? So then the using behavior is within that range. So then what happens is the person gets sober, right? And then now this ends up going back to the normal. So now the experience is like this, right? So it's not up here where the drugs were getting them, but it's not all the way up to, it's not, so the threshold is down here, and then the threshold is here, and now since it's up there and the experience is like this, it's not getting to here, so it's kind of the state of blah blah, right? And then the bottom, they're going below where the bottom level is, so they have a tendency to be really depressed, and they're certainly not getting excited. And it just takes time for the threshold to move down so that this down here is normalized again, rather than it being up here and looking like this. So probably I don't think I have ever done that on camera in such a little thing before. So I hope you found that effective and got the gist of what I was saying. So all right. So let's see. Let's check for questions again. Okay. So it looks like we have another one. Is it common for a person in the early stages of recovery to experience dreams and nightmares about drugs and alcohol? Absolutely. How I like to talk about this is there's two different types of dreams. The first thing is these dreams are super real. In working with clients over the years, it seems that these are more real than any other dreams that they've had. There's usually two types of dreams. One dream is the dream where the person has already used, okay, and they're it's like they just find themselves in the dream and they're like, oh shoot, I used, and they've given up their sobriety, and they feel all of the uncomfortable feelings, and it's so real that in the dream they're actually feeling that emotion, right? And then they wake up and they're like, oh, it was a dream, I still have my sobriety, and they're typically very happy about it. It's like, whew, and relieved, but sometimes a little like weirded out by it, creeped out by it, because it is so real. I mean, myself, I've actually wondered, did that really happen? I actually had to kind of do a reality check, like with my wife. It's like, I was here all night, right? So that actually can be a very therapeutic dream where they actually get to feel the feelings that they would have if they relapsed, and with and they didn't actually have to use. And then the other type of dream is one in which they're about to use. So the person, maybe, I don't know, maybe they're cooking up their crack, or maybe they're on their way to the bar, or they're waiting for the drugs to get delivered, or they can't find it, or they lost it. And so and again, the dream is so real. Now they have that intense craving that occurs right before the use, like that intense craving where sometimes they actually will lose control of bodily functions because they're so excited and their body is preparing itself for the oncoming drug. And now they wake up, and they're waking up with that very craving. That's a real dangerous one. We want to prepare them for that because that can happen. And we do want them to have an escape hatch for that does happen in the middle of the night, whether it's maybe somebody in their support system works nights or is available late in the night. So when they get that kind of a dream, they can get on the phone with somebody, or even just like, it's not somebody in recovery, but even maybe, with the spouse or somebody, a loved one, just call it out and let them know, what's happening. So that's my experience with the dreams. Thanks for that question. And let's see, what else do we have here? And that last question was John again. And so Judy, your example worked well. Your delivery is great. Thank you, Judy. I guess maybe I didn't need to have all of you see that positive feedback, but thank you. All right. So now let's, going back to just like some of the, definition and tenets of CBT, and this is according to cognitive therapy and research, the efficacy of cognitive behavioral therapy. Again, the credits are on your handout. One of the key tenets of CBT is that distorted thinking leads to distress and problematic behaviors, whereas thinking realistically with less negativity allows individuals to respond to challenging life circumstances in an effective way. I gave you an example when we started about, that conference and how my shame was really activated by the fact that room was only 3/4 of the way full. And just by changing the way that I think about it, it totally changed my experience. It was a happy experience. It was great. I mean, I love doing public speaking, and I was able to kind of get my mojo back just because I changed the way I was thinking. So our clients' experiences, again, are so tied to the interpretation and the way they think. This is hugely important for us to be using CBT. And I go to programs, consulting and doing group evaluations and teaching actually supervisors a system that using like a 23-point scale. And one of the things that is measured is, are they using evidence-based practices in their use? And I'm really looking, are they using CBT in the work that they're doing in their groups? Are they using motivational interviewing? So I really think CBT is huge in recovery. And if we're not really addressing the stinking thinking that our clients engage in, then as they call it, then I think we're missing it. So let's go. So these were the interventions, the kind of the antidotes for these twisted 10 ways of twisted thinking, but this is from a different author, Kathleen Davis. And these are if you decide that you want to do a lecture on the 10 forms of twisted thinking, you can follow it up with this maybe, because these really address a lot of them. So we want to teach our clients to stop catastrophizing, thinking the worst. Get with reality, test, the perceptions against reality, checking that out with another person. What's the validity and usefulness of the particular thought? I know I used to have my, counselors and therapists what's the payoff? What are you getting out of thinking in that way? And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. You can look at them yourselves, but stop mind reading and fortune telling. Focus on how things are rather than how they should be. and so forth. So let's go. So then finally, there's social setups, and this is basically lack of communication and isolation. So the person, maybe they're going to a lot of meetings and making a lot of phone calls, and they start feeling better, and maybe they start thinking, well, I don't need the meetings anymore, and I don't need to make phone calls anymore. And they're more and more isolating, and then the mind gets working on them, you know, what I often call the committee. And so there's nobody interrupting the committee. There's nobody interrupting the stinking thinking, right? And we often need others to help us to call that out, to help us recognize that that stinking thinking and that negative thinking, that black or white thinking, that magnification, that blowing things out of proportion. And so the committee just gets to run on us. I often say that in my early recovery, I ran with this group of guys that, you know, kind of rode their coattail in recovery. And this one guy used to say, yeah, I got this committee. It tells me what a piece of junk I am, what a piece of junk you are. And here's all the reasons why you ought to be using. And the only break I got from my committee is when I went to bed and went to sleep. But then, like, I would wake up, and it was almost as if my committee was just waiting for me and says, where the heck have you been? I've been waiting to talk to you. And so usually when I say that, I don't get as much of a laugh as he does. And so I don't have to deal with that. And I'm just going to imagine you all laughed at that. So if my committee gets left uninterrupted for any period of time, my head talks me into stuff that just doesn't make any sense for me. So it's important that we let our clients know that they may think eventually that they don't need to bring others into it and they don't need to engage in recovery behavior, but it's no different really than the you know, the diabetic who needs to take insulin. You know, they might think that they're doing better and they don't need to take the insulin anymore, and they stop taking the insulin. Well, the insulin is why they were better. They stop taking it and they have identifiable symptoms. Well, it's the same for an alcoholic or addict. They stop taking their insulin, going to meetings, making phone calls, doing the recovery behavior, and they have a relapse and return of symptoms typically. Okay, so let's move into trigger events. And so a trigger event is any, according to Gorski, this is his definition, excuse me, any internal or external occurrence that is connected with one's using and activates the craving cycle. So any internal occurrence, so any thought or emotion that was connected with the using and activates the craving cycle, or any external occurrence. So it could be a place that I go, a person that I see. It could be, you know, any one of the five senses maybe being involved. It could be, you know, seeing somebody light a lighter. If maybe I smoked my dope with a lighter, it could be a flip top, or, you know, or a twist top. It could be what a Coca-Cola feels like in my hand, but it also feels like a beer. It could be near beer, which I'm just a real, you know, I really don't like the idea of people drinking near beer, because what could be a bigger trigger than something that feels like a beer, looks like a beer, smells like a beer, and it actually has a little alcohol in it. So so it could be a you know, a person that I see. It could be an event. Could be a time of day, time of year, time of month. So now, I really like using Pavlovian theory and talking to clients about this. So as you're probably aware, Pavlov was this Russian scientist who was doing digestion studies. And so they had a dog in this apparatus, and they had a tube in its mouth that measured digestion, or measured salivation. And so what they would do is they would show the dog meat powder, and so the dog would see the meat and salivate, and the salivation meter would go off. And they did this repeatedly, in, you know, to study this you know, salivation level or digestion. And one day, Dr. Pavlov walks into the lab with his lab coat on. The dog sees Dr. Pavlov, and the salivation meter goes off. And he's like, wow, that's interesting. There seems to be some connection between me and the meat powder. So he decided to try to study this, and they did a third variable. We'll call it a bell. So what they did was they rang the bell, presented the meat powder, and the dog salivated. And they did this repeatedly: bell, meat powder, salivation, bell, meat powder, salivation. And what they found is they could ring the bell, not present the meat powder, and the dog still salivated. So it worked. right? So for our purposes, the bell is the trigger event, right? I'm sorry. Yeah, the bell is the event that is connected with the meat powder, right? So when the dog saw the meat powder, I'm sorry, try this again. The bell is the trigger, the event, which caused the dog to salivate for meat powder, even when the meat powder wasn't there. So it's like this. You know, in translating this to normal life. So if I see somebody that's using, usually I use. So see somebody that uses, use. See somebody that uses, use. See somebody that uses, use. So when I see somebody in recovery, it triggers me to use because that's what I did. There's a connection made, right? Going to a bar, we're working the same way. So let's kind of go into some of the more common triggers. And so I need to check the time here. How are we doing? Okay, so let's start with thinking triggers. So thinking triggers. Whenever a person thinks about using, if that was followed by using, that could become a trigger. Now, there may be some other alcoholics and addicts tuning in here, watching this video. Now, I don't know about you, but when I thought about using, I never really said, nah, I don't think I'm gonna do that. I always did, I always used. Whenever I got a thought of using, I always used. So thinking about using was a huge trigger for me, right? And what Gorski talks about is, now, when I got a thought of using, my first instinct was run. What, I'm not gonna feel this, you know, so, or think this, because like I knew that when I thought about using, I used. So when I thought about using, I didn't want any part of it because I know where this goes, right? Well, Gorski says we actually have to embrace that thought. We have to think that thought through, because if we're not doing that, we're just doing the same thing we're doing when you know, in our disease, where we get an uncomfortable thought or feeling, we're just going to shove it down. Well, it's not going anywhere. It's just sitting there waiting to pounce on us, right? So he says that we actually have to deal with the thought. We have to take the thought in. We have to process it so that particular thought goes away. All right. And so now we have a bunch of more thoughts that may be waiting for us, but that particular one is gone. And so, you know, how that might look is dealing with that thought is get on the phone with my sponsor. Hey, I got one of these thoughts of using, you know, what do I do? And he might say, oh, so you're having another one of those thoughts of using, huh? Okay, yeah. And he might say, well, why did you decide to get sober anyway? And I might, you know, I'd say something like, well, you know, my wife left me. I was about to lose my job. Physically, I wasn't doing well, and my life was kind of a mess. Oh, so that's what happens when you start using? Yeah. Well, then he'd say something brilliant like, well, it doesn't sound like it's a good idea for a guy like you to use, then does it? It seems simple, but just having that reality check and being able to have that interaction, it gets me to be able to make some sense of it. And really, using for me made no sense for this alcoholic or addict. And so I was able to move on from it. And so if I'm able to do that repeatedly, where I get a thought and I process it and get on the other side of it, then what happens, it kind of looks like this. Ring the bell, no meat powder. Ring the bell, no meat powder. Ring the bell, no meat powder. Pretty soon, the bell is, there's a disconnection. It's called extinction, where the bell is now no longer connected with the meat powder. In this case, the thought is no longer associated with using, because it'd be, I thought of using, didn't use, thought of using, didn't use, thought of using, didn't use. So now thoughts of using don't trigger me anymore. Okay, so then there's feeling triggers. I know that when I got angry, it was a trigger to drink Jack Daniels. So how did that work? Again, get angry, drink Jack Daniels. Get angry, drink Jack Daniels. So getting angry in recovery, even without any Jack Daniels around, was a trigger for me to use. Now, if we go back to this definition, the most important thing to remember here is the connection. It's this word connected. That's the most important word of this definition. So if we can remember, it's the connection that makes it a trigger. It's the connection between the event and the actual use. Okay, so whatever events, internal or external, that's connected with the using, that's what makes it a trigger. Okay, and then there's feeling or acting triggers, like, you know, going to bars and, you know, seeing, you know, people who are using, and then yeah, and these are the ones that we can extinguish. We have most control over these acting and behavioral triggers. We recommend that our clients don't get into drinking and using situations. You know, don't do anything that's going to expose them and trigger them in early recovery. And eventually, you know, we can gradually reintroduce some things. And then there's relating or interactional triggers. And so, you know, I use the stereotype of the in-laws. If whenever I'm around the in-laws, I drink and use, then you know, in recovery, if I'm ever around the in-laws, that can be a trigger to use. There's also, like, you know, relating interactional triggers in that, you know, there's like really subsets of triggers. Like, so let's say if seeing George smoke crack was a trigger for me to smoke crack. So see George smoke crack, I smoke crack. See George smoke crack, I smoke crack. So a subset to that would be just seeing George, right? So if whenever I saw George, I smoked crack, well, just seeing George in recovery is going to be a trigger to me. So even though George might be really supportive of my recovery, I need to really avoid seeing George in early recovery, because even though he's supportive, that could be a real trigger. So finally, we go to the trigger recovery process. And so we've kind of already gone through it. So there's avoidance. Then, so we want to help our clients learn the importance of just avoiding as many triggers as possible. And I want to tell you that I think that not enough of our programs really focus on this trigger recovery process. Some don't even like pay any attention to it. Some programs will just help the client identify what their triggers are and encourage them to avoid them. Well, that's really shallow if you look at this, because I mean, how successful do you think people are going to be at avoiding triggers for the rest of their life? Probably not very successful. So we need to teach them how to go through this trigger recovery process, and it begins with the avoidance, and then eventually a gradual reintroduction. So gradual reintroduction can happen with the sponsor. It can be like in their continuing care groups. And it can look something like this. And I'll just give a quick example. So I wanted to go to a wedding in Arizona where my wife's cousin was getting married. And I thought it was a good idea, but I wanted to check with the group because I didn't make those kinds of decisions anymore, because I didn't make very good decisions for my recovery. So I put it out there and, you know, hey, do you guys think I can do this? And they were like, yeah, you probably could if you develop a sobriety plan. And the group right then and there helped me to develop a sobriety plan. Right? So the sobriety plan consisted of carrying a big book onto the plane, because the thinking was when I get on a plane, I have a tendency to order a drink. They had me call the central office in downtown LA to get the central office phone number in Chandler, Arizona, where we were going. Or if it was, if they didn't have one in Chandler, it would have been Phoenix. They actually did have one in Chandler, and my task was to get a meeting scheduled for each day of the trip. And then I would go every day, and then I had a meeting scheduled for the time of the reception, so that if I got triggered at the reception, I could actually go and do that. And that actually did happen. I was hugely triggered by somebody that, you know, plopped a bottle of Jack Daniels right down in front of me, and it just like totally triggered me. And so I went to this meeting and took a 90-day chip with a bunch of, I'll clean it up, hoop kickers from Chandler, Arizona. You know, they had the cowboy hats and the lapels, and you know, here I come walking in with my long, you know, sun-bleached blonde hair, and you know, it was kind of a culture shock, but it was a really neat thing. And if any of you've been to meetings out of town, you know what I'm talking about. So I was actually able to go, I did that. I was actually able to go back to the reception. I have a really cool story about that, but I don't have time to tell it right now. Some of you who've either read my book enough already or seen my videos will know what it is. But anyway, so what happens is, so I got, the rest of the sobriety plan, where I read some of the big book every night. I called my sponsor every day, didn't go anywhere alone except for getting dropped off at a meeting. And so I stayed sober. So I was exposed to alcohol and I stayed sober. So boom, exposed to alcohol, didn't use. So then the next time I wanted to do that, we brought it back to the group. We created a sobriety plan. We first made a decision if it was a good idea at this point in my recovery to do this. And if it was, we created a sobriety plan. So again, was exposed to alcohol, didn't use. It happened repeatedly. Exposed to alcohol, didn't drink. Exposed to alcohol, didn't drink. Exposed to alcohol, didn't drink. So now the connection is actually broken. Now me being around alcohol, it doesn't affect me anymore. I can be around alcohol and it doesn't trigger me anymore. In fact, I can actually be around marijuana without being triggered, which is a good thing now that it's legalized. I mean, I don't really pick, marijuana, situations, but it's around. But I did, I was exposed to it enough, going to concerts, like, one concert I went with my sponsor. I've been exposed to it, be around marijuana, not use, be around marijuana, not use. So now that's been broken. But if one of you guys broke out a crack pipe or some lines, man, I'd be out that door in a flat bang minute. Why? Because cocaine is still a trigger for me. Why? Because I haven't found it necessary to gradually reintroduce cocaine using situations into my life. Yeah. So that's the trigger recovery process. So we help them gradually reintroduce some of the triggers, and then the trigger eventually becomes extinct. So remember what we've done here. We have learned about the setup behaviors that our clients have, many of which are ways of thinking that we can help them to change the way they're thinking, which then can change their emotions and behavior. And it's a hugely important part of recovery. And then we can also teach them about their triggers, so they can initially avoid them, but most importantly, gradually reintroduce them, and eventually they can become extinct. And so by them knowing their set of behaviors and their trigger events, it will be less often that they end up in that craving cycle, and therefore less risk of relapse. So I hope you found that useful. Thank you very, very much for attending. Don't forget, if those of you who are watching this webinar live, hang on, because after I close out this webinar, automatically a post-test and survey will pop up, and you complete this short survey and post-test and hit submit, and then I will receive it, and it'll be from that I will generate your CEU certificates, and I will email them to you. If you are watching the recording of this, you will be sent it in your survey and post-test in a separate email. So thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for attending this webinar, and you can go to my website, bobtyler.net, for future webinars and future live talks. Thank you very, very much. Bye now.